Hey everybody, welcome back. Now we are continuing the topic of the cloud and everything cloud related. So now we're going to talk about the cloud service categories or the types of cloud services, depending on how you want to put that down. Um, this is important because first of all, you're definitely going to have questions on an exam about these, and you need to be able to differentiate between them. But apart from that, this is the very essence of how the cloud operates to begin with. And so you really cannot get away without understanding this. Okay? Um, So first, before we talk about the free categories, let's first talk about what it looks like when you have everything on premise. And remember, um, on premise was the way to go for a long time before well, I guess you can say the cloud revolution began, right? And, and when the cloud became modern or the place to be, it really became a disruptor because um, it basically changed the way um, companies were using infrastructure, right? Or they actually said, why do we have to have everything on premise as we had so far when we can do things in a different way, right? So what you're looking at right now is basically what things looked like before, and they still look like that, uh, in a lot of places. But um, the point is that right now companies know that they can do things differently, right? So it's not just that you now have options, you now have alternatives to that. This was basically the status quo before. And you know, back in the day, you pretty much had um, if especially if you were a big company, you most likely had all of your infrastructure hosted on premises. So this meant that you either had to have your own data center or you had to have your own server room in your HQ, as well as all of your branches, um, or you basically had to have some equipment which you needed in order to be connected, in order to be able to use um, you know, the, uh, the things that you were using in order to be able to store data and so on and so forth. So, um, as small of a business as you might have been, you still needed to have something on premise, um, period. So this meant that all of your applications, all of your databases, everything that you had to be hosted somewhere, um, that you had to take care of. Okay. And the biggest um, con of that, the biggest downside of that was the fact that all of this, budget wise, all of this was capex, right? And we're not going to drill down into the difference between capex and opex, but um, one of the biggest pros of the cloud is the fact that it's replacing capex for opex. Okay, back in the day, all of this was capex. It had to be because it was hosted on premises. Um, okay, so now let's look at the first service type, and this is the so-called IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. Now, all of you who've had even the the smallest or the briefest experience with cloud services, you probably already know what IaaS means. And this is basically like, for example, like having a virtual machine up in the cloud. Okay, so be it AWS EC2, be it a virtual machine in Azure or in GCP, and so on and so forth. So this is basically like having a virtual server hosted somewhere in the cloud. Okay, and you could basically choose um, the OS. You could choose what. So for example, you could say, okay, so I want a machine with these hardware specifications because this is what I need in order to perform whatever job I want to perform with it. And then you're going to have a specific OS installed on top of it. You're going to manage this all the way through all of the applications on top of this OS and so on and so forth. So um, a lot of that, a lot of these responsibilities are still with you, but you're now beginning to offload some of this to the cloud provider. It's not the on-prem situation anymore. The networking piece, the storage piece, the virtualization piece, you have now offloaded this to the cloud provider. So the cloud provider is basically now responsible for this. Okay. Um, okay, so let's continue to shift right or left, I guess, depending on how you see it. But um, the next one is the so-called PaaS or platform as a service. And with the platform as a service, you are now offloading even more to the cloud provider. So now you're basically running. So now the OS is with the cloud provider. Okay, so you're no longer managing that yourself. The cloud provider is now managing that for you. Okay, but you're still managing the applications and the database or databases on top of on top of all of that, on top of this hardware with the OS and so on. So this is still with you. You're still responsible for that. Okay. Um, and you might be asking, in case you're not too familiar with all of this, you might be asking yourself right now, okay, but which one is better, right? So you obviously have different options, but which one is better than the other? There are pros and cons, but is it all down to the pricing or what's going on? And the simple answer is there's um, no better option, right? Um, the cloud is just um, a great alternative to on-prem, but it's not like you need to necessarily um, jump all over it and embrace it no matter what, and so on. So the same goes with these cloud service types, right? If your requirements are such that you need to, um, for example, stand up a virtual machine in the cloud, then this is what you need to do, right? But at the same time, you might be using some PaaS service in order to achieve your goals and meet your requirements. Then that's great. This is what you need to do. Or you need to use some SaaS, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Um, it all comes down to what your requirements are. Your requirements might just as well be to stay on-prem and never go to the cloud. I personally have experience with a company which were openly saying things like, we will never go to the cloud. This is something that nobody even considers over here. It's something completely forbidden. And that's fine if these are your requirements. That's okay. Um, maybe it could be security driven. Maybe it could be something else. But my point is that the cloud is not necessarily something that everyone needs to embrace at all costs, right? Um, it's something great that gives you lots of alternatives, lots of options. It could drastically improve your budget issues, but or like address them when we're talking about having your infrastructure on premises because you're looking at huge cost savings when you go to the cloud because you're only paying for what you have used. But anyway, this is something else that we've already talked about and we're going to talk about again down the road. My point is that you need to understand what your requirements are. This is one of the biggest challenges for every company, basically understanding the requirements. And then after you have that in place, then you can go on and pick your um, cloud services and go from there. The next one is SaaS or software as a service. And this one, I guess, is probably pretty much straightforward, right? Because it's basically offloading almost everything to the cloud provider. So you're no longer managing even the applications and the databases hosted on this infrastructure. So all of that is now managed by the cloud provider. Um, Now, there's the so-called shared responsibility model that all of the public cloud providers are working with, and you definitely need to check this out outside of this lesson, this presentation. Google it, and you definitely find documentation from all of the big public cloud providers regarding that. There's even a pretty funny song that you could find on YouTube about the shared responsibility model. But the point is that this is basically your agreement and your commitment with the cloud provider when it comes down to responsibility, right? It's very clearly outlined. And the reason is because if anything happens, if anything goes south at any point, then you need to be able to go back to this and say, okay, so this is what we agreed on. This is what they were supposed to take care of, and this is what I was supposed to take care of. And this is very important because it gets a lot more complex than it used to be when you were doing everything on-prem. Because with everything on-prem, you know that you're responsible for everything, and there's not even the slightest hesitation or debate around who's supposed to be doing what. But with the cloud providers, it's a different story, right? Because um, all of this is outlined in your contract with the cloud provider, and you want to make sure that you have covered all bases when it comes down to the things that you're responsible for. And by the way, security is a great um, I don't want to say challenge, but it's something very important in that regard because you really need to understand what they're responsible for versus what you're responsible for. Okay. Um, so yeah, this is pretty much it in a nutshell, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Thank you.